Greetings, cardboard fans. Welcome back to Hot Cardboard. Hope everybody's doing well out there. Today I want to talk about ideas for finding good deals out in the sports card world. And in today's video, as you can see before you, I have a couple of examples of some relatively recent pickups. One I just got in, actually just since I did my last video. The other one I picked up maybe a few weeks before that. And these two deals are both sort of indicative of past deals that I've done as well, where I've gotten, a very good price compared to market price on items by seeking them out in ways that I think are maybe not necessarily, unknown, but maybe underappreciated or not really thought of by many collectors who are seeking these kinds of items or similar items or even very different items, but not really finding great ways to find deals on the items that they're after. So I want to talk a little bit about how I acquired these items you see there before you. I'll talk a little bit about them as well. They're actually pretty cool items that I'm happy to really have in the inventory. Because they're 90s basketball, which I just did a video on, and which I have relatively little compared to ideally what I'd like to have, but I've been slower than I think I should be in trying to acquire a mass of this sort of product. So I have to hope I can find deals that are a discount on market in order to pick things up at somewhat reasonable pricing. So the stack of boxes here, this is 7 boxes of 1997 Fleer Basketball Series 2 Retail, which interestingly has 18 packs, which is a very odd number. Like all kind of mid to late 90s basketball, these sets have a lot of cool inserts. If I read off the back, which is this part of the box here, I don't know what I'm trying to show you, but there's Soaring Stars, Total O, Gaudy Greats, Rookie Sensations, Towers of Power, High Flying Soaring Stars, and Thrill Seekers. And 2 of those are actually retail exclusive, so they're not available in the hobby products of this stuff. So really cool product. You're asking, why do I have 7 boxes of these and where did I get them? Great questions. These boxes I bought in a lot through an auction that was run by a guy that I know that I've bought some other kind of high value items from in the fairly distant past. It was like, 8-9 years ago. Well before the pandemic, I picked up a bunch of pre-war graded Ty Cobb cards, which have appreciated nicely since then. But I've been in touch with this guy since then, and done a few deals with him. But a couple of years ago, he started an auction company, and no, I'm not going to name the auction company just because part of the reason I can get these deals is because certain marketplaces have less activity, and I guess I only have like 12 subscribers, so what am I really losing by naming names? But for the moment, I'll just keep it secret. I guess if you wanna can you DM people? You can't DM people by YouTube, but you can email me and I'll be happy to share it with you if you're interested by email, info@hotcardboard.com. But in any event, this smaller auction house, of which there are many because there's always kind of newer, smaller auction houses being started up, it seems. And when they do start up, there's going to be fewer buyers than there are once they've been around for 5-10 years. And so if you find a place like that and they have items that you're interested in, you can often pick up stuff at, a pretty nice little discount. I mean, I don't really know if this particular item, I have to say over time, and I've been buying things from this auction site for, probably about a year now since it started. I mean, I participated in their very first auction. I kind of just bought a few cards that I wasn't particularly interested in, just to support them in that first auction. And over time, I get their notices every time they're doing a new auction. I think they try to do one every couple months or so. And I've picked up a few other things as well, but nothing as large as what this group of boxes represents. So I saw this item uh, appear. There wasn't, there's typically not a ton of sealed stuff, which is my sort of specialty. There wasn't a lot of that in the auction that these appeared in, but this really caught my eye because I was like, oh well, I love it. I love it when I see a group or a lot of things in an auction, just because I feel like there's not that many people typically who want like a quantity of things, but I always want as many as I can get of something if it's a good product and it's at a reasonable price. So I thought, well, the size of this lot is probably going to scare some people away, and I bet I'll probably get a deal on it. So I looked up what these boxes go for. They actually had price stickers on them in the pictures, and I've taken those price stickers off. You can see a little bit of the kind of the residue of the price sticker on this one. Other boxes have basically the same residue, but they came off very easily because they were very old, and the adhesive was just not holding the sticker on very well. So so they look a little bit cleaner now than when they appeared in the auction. And of course I said, well, what do these things go for? So I looked them up on eBay, and I saw what you're seeing here, which is that, somebody sold a bunch of these, because this has the same like background. Actually, all these have the same background, back in like May and June, and they did this over time. But every time they went for the asking price of $99.95. At least I think, anyways. If I click on this, yeah, I think if it's bought for an offer, usually this will be crossed out and it'll be sold by best offer. So we know that these sold for the asking price of $999.95. And then if you go back to April, there's a best offer, or a sort of buy it now, that went for $400, and then $1,000 one in April, late April. So all these seem to be sold by best offer. There's really never auctions on these items, which makes it very interesting to think about what they would go for if they auction. But in any event, I was quite confident these boxes were consistently selling for $1,000. There's been a bunch of sales. And by the way, between June 20th and now, most everything in this era of basketball cards, sealed cards, has gone up in price. So I felt, pretty confident that these were $1,000 boxes, maybe a little bit less because they had like price stickers on them. And these boxes on eBay are all clean boxes. So, I said I probably, didn't want to pay like more than, I don't know, $700, $800 a box. Multiplied that number times 7, and I kind of waded into the auction process by, unfortunately, you can't really do like sniping or, I guess that's it, but you can't do sniping on auctions other than like eBay, because sniping services will generally only work with eBay. So, you got to kind of pay attention to the thing and either put in a very high bid, very high max bid, which will just be swatting away all underbidders as the auction goes forward. Or you can just put in, the bid that gets you to the high bid spot and then wait and see if you go outbid. And I did that a couple times and I got outbid. And eventually I put in a pretty high bid. It was like over $3,000. And I sort of forgot about it for a while. And I was like, oh crap, I was going to kind of pay attention to that auction as it ended to make sure that I, got in additional bids if I was outbid. So I sort of assumed I was going to lose it. But then the next day, I got an email, and it said that I had won the auction. And again, at $1,000 value times 7, this auction is worth roughly $7,000. So my bid, I think it was like $3,200 or something like that. And then there's a buyer's premium on top of that, which is like 15%, which is actually like less than a lot of auction houses charge, which is 20%, but still kind of highway robbery for anybody not used to bidding in these kinds of things, which I generally don't do because I really don't like those high buyer's premiums. But in any event, the net price basically per box was, I think, about $540 per box on these. So, I could sell them on eBay for 850, 900 or something like that and still make a pretty decent little profit on each box. But my goal would be to maybe wait on these until they get to be over $1,000 consistently, and then put one in auction, see what happens. If it gets over $1,000 and I sell it through consignment, which would be my plan, then I'm only paying a 5% fee, and the profits really add up at that point. So, I'll hang on to these for a little bit, enjoy them in the collection, and then, once it gets to be appreciated at a level where I can pretty much rely on it selling for over $1,000 a box at auction through a consigner, then I will, probably part with some of them, but not all of them, and keep, some for the long term. So, moral of the story there is, if there are auctions, and there's tons of auctions auction, small little auction sites. There's software vendors that sell either as a service or, as software you can own, software that allows you to run an auction for any type of item that you want. A lot of people are using that type of software to do their own little auctions. It's kind of a tough thing to do because you have to have enough of an audience that you're actually going to get enough bidders to, get yourself close to market price. Market price being, what it would sell for on eBay. And so it's not very easy to, have a successful ongoing auction site that has a lot of bidders, and it takes quite a while to get there. So if you find an auction site that has good items and you can bid on them before, the site gets blown up with popularity, which may take, several years, then you're probably going to be able to get fairly good pricing. So look for those opportunities. Look for non, card auctions. There's also around where I live, I can't remember what it's called, but there's an auction site that just does like local items or regional items. And it's all sorts of items. So it's like, I don't know, furniture, curtains, books, clothing, estate stuff. And occasionally you will see collectibles on there. You can certainly search for those items. And if you see something good, it's probably going to go for less there than it would on something like eBay, where there's, lots of people looking only for collectibles and snapping up any kind of good deals that appear there. So look for these kind of smaller, maybe regional, maybe non, collector specific auction sites, and, see what comes through the doors there for a few months. And if anything comes through with any kind of regularity that's of interest to you, you very well may be able to get a very good price, as I got on these 97 Fleer basketball boxes. So the second item I want to talk about is this pack here, of which I have a stack. I have 6 of these packs, and these are 1997 Fleer Flair Showcase basketball cards. Very cool, super premium product. The pack has this like rainbow foil finish to it. Really neat stuff of the sort that you saw. Just a lot of stuff, a lot of kind of premium cards like this in all sports, but in basketball especially in the late 90s. So I'm super excited to have these. And the way that I got these is I was at a card show, and I was looking at a table of a dealer, and I was just kind of taking a peek at their sealed stuff, as I always do. And there was a stack of these in the showcase, and I was just sort of like, looking at them, and I think they were priced at like $140 or $150 a pack. And I said, well, that's very interesting. I bet those are pretty cool. I have no idea what's in them, but other than basketball cards. So, maybe I'm interested in those, maybe I'm not. And, as I was just sort of looking at them and, looking up, seeing if I could find comps, the dealer came over, and he's like, if you buy all of them, I'll give you a deal. And I was like, oh, okay, well, what are you thinking? He said, I think like $130 a pack. And I said, okay, well, let me think about it. And, I went and looked up comps, and I saw that, I'll bring over these things. You can see some of the cards that are in these, but these packs go for $350 a piece. There's actually one listed for $325, so I don't think they consistently go for 350, but there were certainly a few sales there. I did see older sales at 200 and less, so I knew that there was some possibility they might go for less. But I mean, having looked at a bunch of comps for a bunch of 90s sealed basketball stuff, I now know that it's likely that the market just moved between April and May of this year and June and July of this year. So these probably are pretty consistently going to sell for 350 or maybe right around there, 325. As you can see, there's one for sale. I think it's the only one that's for sale right now for 325 plus 12 shipping. So there's one for $500. There's one for $245 plus 12 shipping. So that's definitely the cheapest, and who knows how long that'll be there. That's very interesting. But, safe to say these are probably at least a $200 pack, hopefully a $300 pack, $350 pack. But I said, you know what, let's do it. Let's buy them all. So I picked them up, put them in these nice little May cases that I have for actually for Pokemon booster packs. And, they display just beautifully. And, I'm super happy to add them. But what I wanted to say about how I picked these up is just that, this was in my town, this was at a show that was actually the first show that was done by the organizer who did it. Now, the dealer that I bought these from is actually somebody I've seen at other shows. He used to have a card shop. And actually, he said he bought these, for his card shop, like back, I think, in the late 90s. And so, at this card show, that was the first card show run by the promoter that ran it, I saw actually a lot of dealers that I had not seen for a while or that I'd never seen at all. And, that felt like it always sort of feels like that might be a good opportunity to see some things that you're not going to see at, the other shows. There's a monthly show or a sort of semi-monthly show that's been organized around here for like decades by the same guy, and it's kind of always the same dealers. And sometimes they do have new items, but more often than not, they just kind of have the same stuff you've seen 100 other times. So I very rarely find any kind of deals at that show, but there are starting to be more and more shows done by new promoters in my area. I think we now have like 4 or 5 different promoters of shows in my area. And for a while, I actually thought about promoting myself because we only had one show and one promoter. And I was like, there's got to be more of a need and demand for shows in my area. So I started looking at locations and pricing things out and planning and stuff like that. But then all of a sudden, like 3 or 4 of them started announcing shows. And I said, you know what, my work here is done. I didn't have to do anything. And now there's like 5 times as many shows in my area as there were before I started planning to do shows. So it worked out very well because now I don't have to do any work, but I get to go to all these new shows, some of which have vendors, who I've never seen before and who have stuff that I've never seen before. And again, this is not an example of one of those vendors, but he did have, products I'd never seen before because I'd not seen these kind of things ever at his tables in the past. And so this new show, that's, a small show, it's probably like, 30 or 40 vendors there and maybe 50 or 60 tables. This size of show, I think, is really perfect. And if it's a show that, hasn't been going on for like months or years, you're probably going to see vendors or at least product that you haven't seen in your area at any of the shows that, have been around longer. I had a similar sort of experience when one day I was traveling in Minneapolis. I was there for a tennis tournament, and I decided to see what shows were going on. And in Minneapolis and a lot of large cities, they have shows every single month, and so, or every single weekend, I should say. So there's always something going on. So I went to 2 shows that weekend. One was a huge, huge show. It was like one of the biggest TCG only shows in the entire country. It's like 250 tables of all TCG stuff. And I was like super excited about that one because, I knew I was going to see a lot of, variety and a lot of cool stuff that I'd not seen before. But on a whim, I went to a smaller show. It was in a high school gym. It was like, 25 dealers. It was probably a show that was relatively new. I had not heard of it before. And I look, whenever I'm in Minneapolis, I look at the shows that are going on. I know there's quite a few that, that do shows monthly on a regular and ongoing basis. And this was not one had heard of. So I went to the show and, I bought a good amount of stuff. There were some really cool, just like single, like vintage sports cards that were pretty cheap. A bunch of like Gretzky's from the 80s and older football cards. That's the kind of stuff I really love if it's like, reasonably priced. So I bought a bunch of stuff there. From that same dealer, I made a connection and I ended up seeing that dealer at some other shows and bought a bunch of stuff for really cheap from them. Actually bought, I'll show you 5 of these things. If you're a Pokemon collector, these are really nice. Evolving Skies Elite Trainer boxes. I bought those for like $275 each when they were about $300 and market. Now they're $500. So, I made a good connection there with a good seller that I've bought from a few times after that point of meeting them at other Minneapolis shows. And, there was another vendor there who I could tell, probably wasn't somebody who vended a ton, but they had a bunch of really neat, like 80s sports card boxes that were very reasonably priced. So, I bought a bunch of stuff just at his sticker price. I think one of the items was like an 87 Topps football box, which I always buy whenever I see for anything reasonable, price wise. So I bought that stuff. There was another dealer who was dealing Pokemon cards, and he had some really cool stuff. I almost bought like a really high end box from him for like $800 or $900, but I actually decided that I probably should save my money for the big show, which was going to be the next day, instead of spending like $2,000 or $3,000 at this show. But what happened was I went to the big show, the big TCG show, and it was very busy, and there was a ton of dealers there, and there was really cool vintage Pokemon sealed that is my favorite thing, and not a single thing was priced that I wanted. And if there's one thing I'm not going to do is buy anything from a dealer of high-end vintage stuff who doesn't have prices on their items. Because I know from experience, and I've been in this game for 30 years, I know from experience, if I have to ask, it's too high. It's a bad deal. It's somebody who doesn't want their stuff to be comped. They don't want anybody to compare prices. They don't want educated buyers. They want somebody who doesn't really, I think, have a great way to do comparison shopping or find alternative items, which is a lot of people when you're talking about high-end stuff, be it high-end sports cards or high-end sealed Pokemon cards. Some of these things are very difficult to find copies of stuff that you can buy from a trusted source or a reasonably trusted source. So I think that people who don't price those are aiming at folks that are thinking they don't really have any other options to buy. So whatever price they put out there is something they'll just have to maybe haggle down a few bucks, and that will be the purchase price. But I'm not going to haggle with people generally, and I'm not going to ask if you have a case of sealed like Pokemon packs, all of which are like $300 or more a piece. I may be interested in 10 or 20 of them. I'm not going to ask you for 10 or 20 price checks. I'm just going to say, well, that's cool stuff. Move on to the next table. So at this big show, I did end up buying a few things because there was one guy who had some cool collector boxes of Pokemon that were, that had prices on them, and the prices were fairly reasonable. And I said, you know what, that's good stuff. I'm going to buy that. I can show you what those are actually. Or can I? Yeah, actually. All right, I have something that's buried under something else, so I can't really grab it easily, but some cool Pokemon collector boxes, from the 2020, 2021 time frame is what I got, but I didn't buy anything else. I probably spent $400 total at that big, huge show. And I could have spent so much more at the smaller show that I went to the day before, where I feel like the deals were much better and everybody was much more reasonable on pricing. So what's the moral of this story? Well, the moral of the story is that I think there are way better deals at smaller regional or even hyper local shows than there are at these big shows. And I think about the idea of going to Comic Con, and it's like it would be fun, or not Comic Con, I'm sorry, Collecticon, which is for Pokemon and TCG cards. Um, and I think it would be a fun experience to see some cool cards that you probably don't see every day. Some probably $100,000 cards. But I feel like I would not want to buy anything at these shows. And you hear this a lot. People go to those shows and are like, yeah, they had some cool stuff. Everything was overpriced. I couldn't really buy anything. And there are like a handful of dealers that I think buy and sell to each other. And they do it at percentages. So they're shaving off 1, 2, 3% of the purchase price as their profit. But as far as deals for the common man, large shows, in my view, are not nearly as good as smaller shows. And so, if you have new shows popping up in your area, as I think is probably true of a lot of areas and not just mine, or you have a choice of shows to go to, and one is maybe only a couple times a year, and the other is like a regular monthly show, I would say look for the look for the deals at the shows that are less frequent, that are smaller, that are more out of the way. Anything that kind of I don't know, gets them to be less likely to have the same old dealers and the same old inventory is those are factors that make shows super desirable, in my view, to go to look for stuff that you've not seen before, to find dealers who are more reasonable and who put prices on their stuff, and those prices are sensible and not pie in the sky type prices that they want to get haggled down 50% on. So that would be the other place that I would say to look, is the smaller shows. Maybe you have to go out to a suburb. Maybe you have to drive 100 miles or something. And this actually kind of makes me want to go to shows now that are like, an hour and a half or 2 hours away from me, in places that I've never been before, because I think those shows necessarily are going to have, very different vendors who may have very different stuff. And the stuff that I like is very eclectic. I mean, this 90s stuff is super fun. And if you know, you know, but not many people have that stuff, and very few people are interested in buying that stuff, especially now that it's so expensive. So the things that I like, which is a lot of sealed stuff, tends to be stuff that sits around a while because there aren't that many buyers of it. And so it's okay if, I go to a show 4 hours after it started, or somewhere around the second day or something like that, because what I want is typically, not something that I'm competing with a lot of other people on. And that's true of a lot of things at these smaller shows, because whereas a very large show, you may have a lot of people, by sort of raw number, not as a percentage of the total total number of people, attending, but just in terms of the hard number of people at a large show that are interested in Seals 90s basketball, it's going to be, a fair number. But you go to a smaller regional show, I may be the only person out of like 1,000 folks that go to that show who have any interest in dropping thousands of dollars on sealed 90s basketball. So that puts you as a buyer in a really good spot, because, nobody else is going to buy any of this stuff. If this dealer wants to sell it for cash that day, they're going to have to work probably with you or maybe one or two other people. And that's it for competition. So that's my other tip, is to look for these smaller, regional, irregular, and newer shows, instead of going to these large 100, 200, 300 table shows where you're just much less likely to find cool stuff at reasonable prices. So that's what we have for today. I hope everybody's doing well. I will see you all next time. Till then, have a good one. Bye now.